one day I woke up and looked back, like those 5-7 years of my life had just vanished. And couldn't tell one day from other. And yes, it was affording me a certain lifestyle, but there was nothing in that life to write home about.
Welcome to the Bro Novo podcast, the podcast that models healthy communication for men, empowering them to start the journey of self-work. Now here's your host, Thomas Pierce.
Welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Bro Novo podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Pierce, and as always, we are here to model healthy communication for men. My guest this week is Kushal Choksi. He is the author of On a Wing and a Prayer, a 9/11 survivor's true story, spirituality for the reluctant, the curious, and the seeker. Kushal survived the attack on the World Trade Center on September 11th, which completely changed his life and forced a reevaluation of his values and how he and his wife spend their time. It was an absolute pleasure to have Kushal on the program. He has some really wonderful insights about life and how we can all do our part to make the world a better place. So enjoy this episode, and I'll see you next Thursday on the Bro Nouveau podcast. And we're live. Good morning, Kushal.
Good morning, Thomas. How are you?
Great. I'm very excited to speak with you and sending a thank you to Hong Mei for connecting us.
Likewise.
Which was very cool. Yeah. My listeners who will remember that episode with Hong Mei. So you are also a practitioner and instructor of the Sky Breath.
That's right. Yes.
Awesome. But that's not all you do. I have a rundown of your personal and professional CV here. So everybody buckle in. So you're a husband. Are you a parent as well?
I'm not a parent yet. My wife and I, we kid about it that we have two babies. One's our startup, our chocolate startup. That's our little baby. And the other one just recently born, our new book. So those are our two babies.
Awesome. Musician, bassing guitar. You can doodle as well. On the education side, you have an MS in computational finance and in informational systems from Carnegie Mellon, which is no joke. So you founded this chocolatier, which is a really cool. So it's a Ayurveda artisanal chocolate company, which sounds interesting. Previously, you were a stock trader working at big names like Goldman Sachs and BlackRock. You switched industries and went and founded a business in the content platform that was then acquired. You opened your own trading house. And so now you have this, you've left the financial world and have this chocolate startup. So just for one, like, wow, what a varied interest list. Like I love interesting people. So that off the bat, I'm just like enamored. I'm like, wow, like, so how did you get to this point of having all of these varied and kind of rich interests?
We always have this sort of interests, but especially in my case, I had so many hobbies and so many things that I always wanted to do. But there was a strong conditioning and also a little bit of a fear of judgment of, hey, I've spent so much time pursuing like these degrees, and now I've gone or risen so high up in a corporate ladder in this world of finance, and now how foolish it would be to give it all up and start wrapping chocolates. What would the world think? What would my friends say? So there's always a little bit of that. So I guess my practice of breathwork and meditation, that gave me the courage and strength to follow my heart and go about things that really were more meaningful to me in the long term. And that's how
Awesome.
That's how I've been able to move from one thing to the other without worrying much.
Yeah, so that journey within somehow gave you the confidence or the peace of mind to not kind of let others' potential judgment influence you.
Exactly.
Isn't that funny how it's always the potential judgment that can stop us, not even real reactions?
Yeah, we always think way too much about what others think of us, right? When in reality, nobody has time to think about us. Everybody's perhaps busy thinking what others are thinking about themselves. So there's no headspace for anyone to let you in. But yeah, you're always getting kicked around based on what others' opinions, what others think of us. And not only big decisions of our life, but in every small way we show up in our life, we kind of want to align to that so as to not, or so as to minimize the friction, if you will. Want to play it safe.
For sure. Yeah, that's an interesting point, because that's another thing that we're kind of conditioned to do, is to avoid the friction, right? Not to, don't rock the boat, don't make others uncomfortable, avoid unnecessary risk. But friction is good too, because friction, like in a really, in like a very, like a kind of like a picture way, like friction creates heat and creates new energy and sparks and creativity. But also, like, if there's friction in something in our lives, we should listen to it and not ignore it, because it may be telling us that something is amiss, right?
Exactly. It's, I love that visual that you just painted in front of me. I mean, it just keeps things moving, things dynamic. Otherwise, if I look at my life before, it was just a very monochromatic, a singular pursuit. If I may loosely say, I was completely enamored or entrenched in that rat race, if you will. And sort of the days were merging into weeks and weeks into years. And, one day I woke up and looked back, like those 5-7 years of my life had just vanished. And couldn't tell one day from other. And yes, it was affording me a certain lifestyle, but there was nothing in that life to write home about.
Yeah. And then there was one moment where your perspective changed, right? And that was on 9/11. So what happened on that day for you? And how does that day fit into your narrative?
So that day was one of the big pivotal moments in my life, and I had a miraculous escape from World Trade Centers. I happened to be in the building when the first plane hit, and I saw death from such a close quarters. It was such a up close and personal, in the vicinity of death. Whether watching people perish in front of me or watching those towers collapse as I just ran out of them. It did create a feeling that there had to be more to life than what met the eye. That what I was doing was great, but was that all there was to life? That's a moment I began to question the status quo. And that's the moment I began to question what I was really here to do. And it created a feeling of a void, if you will. Looking back, I can say it was a feeling of void. And to try to fill that, I tried to start doing crazy things, traveling around the world, changing jobs, going from a corporate world to a startup and back, and just trying to find that rush, trying to find that adrenaline, if you will. And I realized that every time I was doing something like that, it would give me a momentary high, and then I would come back to the same state, feeling even more exhausted, and that continued for a while. It was a really interesting time of my life as I look back, because on one hand I was very energetic, I was very enthusiastic with the new lease on life, and wanted to kind of finish the unfinished business, if you will, what I had come to this country as an immigrant to achieve. But on the other hand, there was this nagging voice in the head that kept saying, but what's the point of all this? What if something like this were to happen again? You know, why are you doing what you're doing? So it was a very interesting period of my life.
That's incredible. And I'm very happy that you survived and are here to bring light into the world now after that. So on our program, we try to model healthy communication for men. And one of the things that isn't talked about a lot is, you know, how to recover or how to cope after a really traumatic incident. So obviously that sounds very traumatic and horrifying. So how did you process those experiences? How did you move that trauma through your body and release it? And how did you kind of process that? Yeah. As the most general kind of way to question it.
I guess, as I just briefly mentioned, my knee jerk was to simply distract myself away from it, because I perhaps didn't want to relive those moments, didn't want to go back. When somebody would ask me, how did this happen? Where were you? What happened? I would just very quickly run through the events of the day and say, oh yeah, but aren't you happy I'm here? And let's talk something different. Let's talk something pleasant. And so I would just avoid going there. And again, I was constantly trying to distract myself by looking some fulfillment outside. I didn't even know, you know, looking back now, I can say that that's what I was doing. At that point, it just felt very natural to do that. Okay. You know, I need to do something bigger. I need to do something better. I need to do something crazier because guess what? You know, because I can. And when, one afternoon was the first time when I experienced a meditation. You know, there was a spiritual master, Sri Ravi Shankar, who was traveling to New York, and I was very reluctant to all these alternative modalities. But a friend of mine just pushed me into it, and then I ended up there. And for the first time when I meditated with him, I experienced a state of mind without any turbulence, without any thoughts. And that's when I felt like perhaps this was something I've been looking for. I was still very guarded. I was still very cautious. I was not ready to submit to it right away or subscribe to it right away because, you know, I had a conditioning of these things being anti-progress. These things may take the edge off my life. Meditation is something you would do when you retire, you know, a pursuit for the later time of your life. So I had all these wrong notions in my head. So I was very guarded. But then when I started doing some research around this meditation and breath work and how actually it really impacted, how it made a difference, it changed everything for me. And that's when I began going deeper in search for other dimensions.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great, man. And thank you for sharing all of that also. This is a very, obviously, intense topic. But yeah, the sky breath it's been awesome for me. And the thing that, you know, I feel like I'm very much at the beginning of kind of my journey with it and with mindfulness in general, but I'm recently feeling really energized and excited about the journey within. You know, just kind of as I start to probe more, I can feel the vastness, and that is like incredibly exciting and motivating, you know, to keep going.
Yeah.
So that's just on an anecdote, something that's been really energizing for me lately.
I was always looking for a hidden muffin, though, Thomas, to be frank with you. Is this really working, or is this a peak experience, or am I really, because I'm exhausted, I am sleeping it off, or am I part of some placebo, or like, what is this, right? And but there was a very, very well documented scientific research from the institutions I trust, Stanford, Yale, so on, and that gave me a lot of comfort. That gave me a lot of assurance that no, this was not just some feel-good thing. There was actually scientific bearing that created this sense of calm or peace or whatever that I was experiencing. So I kept going further.
For sure. Yeah, I listened to a medical research podcast, and there's been some studies recently about not specifically sky, but just kind of hyperventilating style breath as basically it kicks up adrenaline, which activates the immune system. And it's been proven to be, or shown to be effective at the start of a illness, like a mild illness, to do that as a way to kind of kickstart the immune system, which is really cool.
Yeah. So
you later write a book about this experiences, On a Wing and a Prayer. But I want to talk about that for sure. But it's also interesting because I'm hearing that you had this hyper focus as a business person previously. And that could be something that a lot of listeners either are on that path or grew up in an environment where that was the priority. I certainly did, as far as, different, obviously, coming to America is a very different experience than growing up here, but kind of having commercial success and having career be everything. So one, where did you move from? And two, what do you think were the forces that influenced you to be kind of hyper-focused on the progress and on the sustaining your edge and not losing your, competitive advantage?
Yeah, I moved to this country from India, and so I grew up in a very small town, and I always had this dream of when I saw things on TV, or there was no internet back then, but when I saw things, I always felt like, no, I wanted to go to, like, how cool would it be to someday visit New York or live like how these people live. And then when I came to Wall Street, that feeling just got further intensified because it was such a strong alpha culture that just gets propagated down through osmosis. As you look at some people, your bosses and bosses, being super successful in the eyes of the world, right? And so it was that thing, and this whole process, whole practice of breathwork and meditation, which I earlier thought would take that edge away, or you had to go to a cave and become a monk to really go deep into it. It actually was exactly the opposite. It gave me more strength. It gave me so much more clarity. Unbeknownst to my effort, it also improved my intuition, and that led me to take more risks. That led me to take or do, in my words, crazier things that I would have never imagined doing. I mean, I gave up a very promising Wall Street path. I was a managing director with a hedge fund, and to start a tech startup. It was just me and one of my other friends. Two of us did a tech startup, and from there on, my first startup failed. The second one got acquired, and the next I started a chocolate company with my wife. So it has given me so much more that strength to be agile, the strength to pivot, the strength to really do what I want to do without thinking about, what if, I was a person who thought a lot about what if. I need to secure my basis first. I need to get things in line first before I took that incremental risk. And that thing kind of diminished in a responsible way, but it went away.
In a responsible way, of course.
Well, I'm not saying become a cowboy. Everyone has their own reality, right? But
Yeah.
there's always something that's holding us back from listening to that inner voice. And this practice gave me that strength to go after it.
If you had any reflections on, how men are conditioned and the problems associated, what would they be? Because that's a common theme of our show too, is to make it okay for men to have conversations like we're having and be honest and be transparent about our shortcomings and not try to pretend everything's okay. So yeah, I know it's a very big question, but as far as the kind of areas of improvement for men in this country and maybe also in India, what would they be from your perspective?
You're right. It's a very broad topic. I think there's always this, and reflecting back upon my life, there's always this fake sense of urgency to get there, and to show the world that you've arrived. Whereas there is no arriving in my mind now. There is no place to get there, because even when you get there, the goalpost is going to shift. And then there will be another place where you would rather be at that point. And you get there, and then there's somewhere else you'd rather be. So there's always this thing where we constantly keep postponing our fulfillment or happiness to some event in future, and something that we say is very conditional upon something else. Okay, if I get this, then I've made it. Then I'm happy. If I get that, then I'm really happy. But when you get there, that object to which you've already conditioned your success and happiness is definitely going to change. So I guess that the one thing that I learned from my teacher is how the wisdom is in, disconnecting our own measure of success from the people and situations around us. And that's when life really becomes an expression of that joy, that happiness, rather than a pursuit of it. And that's something that over a period of time became an experience. Sometimes we read these things, sometimes you hear these things, and it feels really good. It appeals to the intellect. But until these things become an experience that we've lived through, or that becomes like our own, it comes from the core of our own being, it just is another feel-good exercise. So that could be one. And I think the other thing is just taking that few moments, because we are in such a rush to get somewhere. We usually put ourselves last on the list. And I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with so many of my friends, so many of the overachievers that I'm they're such dear friends of mine. I call them overachievers because they have surprised themselves, surprised everyone, and they still keep going. They still keep creating new highs. And somewhere along the way, they just ignore one thing: their own health and their own well-being. So I think it's super, super important as we go after these things, which I still believe in going after. I'm fully entrenched into the pursuits. I have certain goals. I'm very passionate about things I do. But taking that 20 minutes of time a day, which apparently nobody has, to go deeper and kind of rest deeper, so that you can come back stronger, bounce back stronger, and play hard in the world outside.
Awesome. I like that. Yeah. So I'm hearing that it's okay to participate in this crazy competitive, capitalist system, but take time to serve yourself as well, because ultimately these pursuits, they serve us so specifically now I'm talking about someone, say like a men or anyone who is caught up in the rat race, if you will. It's okay to do that, but it's also really important to rest deeply, as you said, and kind of make sure you don't lose oneself in that, and kind of, as you said in the beginning, have 6 years of your life blend together and wonder, if that's happening, then how does anyone know who they are if they can't differentiate the season of their life, right?
Yeah. And I would say, I would go one step further. I would say it's not just okay, it's important that you run the race. It's important that you partake in everything that's going on around us. That's what makes life, right? And it's important to enjoy that everything that the world has given us, or there is to enjoy in the world, but not just getting so deeply entrenched that you feel stuck or you feel miserable when one of those things doesn't go your way, which is going to happen one way or the other. I mean, if this pandemic was anything, it was just that, right? That whatever you plan, whatever you think is going on, something, an unknown force of nature can just come and just destroy or disrupt everything.
Totally. And the way that you also are so, nonchalant about the first startup failing, for example, is a good example of that. A lot of people probably would be devastated by that and not start another one and then succeed with it, right?
Oh, I was devastated too. I was devastated too. But there was a feeling that no, I need to keep going. I need to keep going. And perhaps that was that feeling of that inner security, that inner strength that I was feeling at that moment, or whatever that was. But it was a tough time. It was a tough time of my life, and I felt like, why did I make this decision? But that also gave me a strength to live everything that I had practiced, everything that I had learned. Because you don't need to learn or do all these things when life is great, life is going good. It's only when things are crumbling around us that's when that strength is needed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, that's where I'm at as far as, my mental health and my, kind of journey with therapy, is that right now I'm in a decent place, a good place mentally. And now is when I want to fortify, and strengthen the foundation, right? And using Sky and other mindfulness tools to just fortify, because the next storm is always coming, and you can't stop that.
You touched upon something so beautiful there. It's like we always go looking for these things when things have hit the fan and when things are crumbling around us. But if you start when things are going well, and as you said, you strengthen your base, then you just are so much better equipped or better prepared to deal any kind of upheavals that may come down the road.
For sure. So something else that we talk about on the program a good bit is identity and the dynamics of race and class in the United States. And I think that your perspective and your experiences post 9/11 would probably be really interesting, and I imagine challenging as a survivor, but also post 9/11. I was quite young. I'm only 26, but from what I have picked up is that it created this Middle East sentiment. And as someone, you're not from the Middle East, you're from the Indian subcontinent, but you could look to be from the Middle East from someone who is uneducated on this may think that you were from there. So how did that confluence of, protective territorial patriotism, ingrained xenophobia and misunderstanding, and from a lot of, may say, white Americans who have no, pre-exposure to anyone who isn't also white, and then you kind of having this crazy traumatic experience, being on the receiving end of these terrible actions, and then also potentially being identified as one of the perpetrators by strangers who don't know your story. Was that something very challenging to deal with? I can see that being a problem.
Thomas, it's only once in my life I experienced that. Fortunately, I've lived in New York, and it's a very, very progressive, very open culture. And most of the people, I mean, it's such a cultural hot pot here, right? So everybody's here from different parts of the world, and so there's tremendous amount of acceptance in New York City from that point of view. But since you brought it up, it was the first time right after 9/11, I wanted to move away from the city because there was that something in here that I didn't want to be around here. So this isn't day 2. I'm talking about September 12th. And I decided to move away. My girlfriend used to live in North Carolina, so I thought, look, I'll just go there. And all the modes of transport were shut down. There was no trains, no aircrafts. So I jumped on a Greyhound bus. And the first time it was a full bus. I very clearly remember I was just walking down that little thin aisle between 2 rows of seats, and I was getting like really weird looks from people on the bus that night. First I didn't understand what was going on, but then I realized that perhaps it could have something to do with it, and it turned out to be the longest silent bus ride of my life. But yeah, I really wanted to scream that I have more in common with you than I have with the people you're right now hateful towards. But there was only time in my life in this country I felt violated is the right word. But other than that, I have been very fortunate. Either personally or professionally, I've never felt that discrimination or that I'm different from others kind of feeling.
Great. That's good to hear. What do you think we can learn or take away from the experience of that kind of xenophobia or, fear of the unknown? What does that say about the human condition that people have that fear of the unknown?
I think at the depth of it all is some level of stress, right? Unless one is completely stress-free, that feeling of being one with everyone, feeling of belongingness, that feeling of that camaraderie doesn't come. I mean, even in our lives, we all have experienced that the moments we are stressed, we show up differently in our relationships. Even our closest relationships with our spouses, with our, significant others, we have this, if there's something nagging us, something bothering us, we show up very differently. We respond, we react very, very differently. And perhaps at some level, this feeling or this sentiment is amplified many folds when these impressions or these conditioning or wrong indoctrinations are so much deeper ingrained. Maybe the way you've grown up looking at this, when you've grown up with, hearing bombshells all around you. I mean, there's a certain conditioning, there's certain make of mind that happens. And who is to say that if you and I were in exact same shoes, we had this exact same upbringing, our thinking will also not be like that. So I think it's something we ought to deal with compassion. We ought to deal with larger acceptance, and to know that you could be one of them. Yeah, you could be that person if you had the exact same level of circumstances growing up around you, or what you had been exposed to, and maybe help those who are stressed. I mean, I feel something I learned from my teacher is that unless you have a stress-free individual, there cannot be a harmonious society. So Yeah, I strongly believe in that, and so perhaps it's our collective responsibility to do tiny bit something to contribute towards a stress-free and more happier world around us.
I like it. It's cool because I think that my perspective on a lot of these kind of social topics are unintentionally shaped by the kind of media the very like liberal media narrative, right? It's very identity focused. It's very, what can I as a white guy do to help remedy this? Or what can someone as a XYZ identity do? But the answers you're giving me are very holistic and very collective. And it's not about what anybody looks like. It's about how are they contributing to the harmony? How are they bringing themselves to the solution?
And if you think of it, the difference between all of us, you and me, is just skin deep, right? At the core, we are all the same. We all go through the same human experiences. Mm-hmm. We all go through the same ups and downs and highs and lows, and it's so similar. Everything we do is so similar. It's just optics are different. Mm-hmm. And that probably creates that my way is better than your way, but it's at some level it's so immature.
Totally. And it is an interesting kind of pushback too on the common discussion around how to improve society, because a lot of the pushback is that we're creating more divisions by being hyper focused on identity, which is interesting, right? Because it's kind of counterintuitive, but I've seen it in myself in having these discussions and having thoughtful conversation with people. It that's a bigger conversation around my personal interest. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I kind of identified that in your answers about how basically what you're saying is that it doesn't matter. In the best way, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, you feel like the best way that you can contribute to the world and improve the lives of everyone is kind of sharing and teaching this method of self-discovery that it focuses on the universalities of the human experience.
Yeah, I mean, one approach could be sitting here criticizing the media or finding faults with everything that's going around us. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's so much polarization, right? There's so much. The narrative is so split all around us. You can't tell what's right, what's wrong. They all have a very strong perspective. But perhaps what we can control, amongst a lot of things that we can't, is what do we do about it? How do we contribute? Are we just spectators, or perhaps have a little meaningful contribution to this in a small way? Because another thing that I always used to think is that what can one person like me make a difference? As I started sharing these practices and as I started volunteering my time doing this, I realized that it's, even if you're making a small difference in one mind, that's still sufficient. That's still huge.
Totally. Because the whole thesis that we're operating on is that there's an entire unlimited consciousness and universe inside of every person, right? So
yeah, if
you can influence that one person, you're actually affecting a massive and unlimited amount of consciousness, right? To use that logic.
There's actually there's a scientific study done. It's called Maharishi effect, where it says that if 1% or 0.1% of the people meditate in a particular area, it creates harmony and reduction in stress and crime in that neighborhood. They did that with actual people just meditating there for 8 hours a day, and they saw that difference, how in that particular area all these things, so the social evils just dropped. So who's to say?
That's incredible. It's called the Harishi effect.
Maharishi effect. There's actually even a book written about it.
The books, you wrote a book. So what motivated you to share this story in the book format?
Thomas, I was a very different person compared to who I am now, and I thought that if I could experience all these things, if I could do these things, then anyone can. And I see that the same reservations, the same that guarded feeling that I had once in my consciousness. I see a lot of people around me who are curious yet a little bit of skeptics. They're like, okay, this is great. I'm going to download an app, but let's see where it takes me. So there are hundreds of people I know who are in that state, and I feel that what I have experienced, if I want everyone on this planet to experience, and that was the inspiration to write the book. Just it has been a very unfiltered, unbiased account of my journey as someone who looked at this whole mindfulness, spirituality, meditation from outside in. Dealing with things, the stereotypes, the judgments, all those things. Whether this is really for me, I've just laid it out as I experienced it.
Awesome.
But yeah, that was my motivation to write this.
Awesome. How was the experience? Did it flow, or was it a grind to write it? And what did you learn about yourself through the process?
It would not be completely out of character to say that the book kind of wrote itself. I can take all the credit that, oh yeah, I sat and I did this and like that, but I'm someone who doesn't follow processes. I don't like processes. So for me to come up with this whole story arc and this and that was very uncharacteristic. So I just started writing, not knowing how it'll end or how it'll flow, and it just started falling in place. It was a very, very smooth experience, and I learned a lot about myself as part of writing it too. Some of the things, as I had to put things chronologically, I had to go back in those moments and I'm like, oh yeah. And oftentimes when I've now been meditating and practicing this breath work, sky breath, for almost 16 years. And you can't really tell any difference from one day to the other. Like every day, something shifts so infinitesimally small. This is just a gradual shift at a very glacial pace. But when you look back 15 years and say, oh, wow, look how much has changed. Or within the span of 6 months or 1 year, oh, wow, that was quite a distance I came. So that was an interesting way to look at the whole thing.
Totally. As a reflection tool.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm extremely motivated to continue my breath work because of this conversation. So thanks for that on a personal level.
You're welcome.
Where can folks find your book? Where is it retailing?
On Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. It's called On a Wing and a Prayer: Spirituality for the Reluctant, the Curious, and the Seeker.
Nice. I like that because it encompasses all three buckets, right? The reluctant, so all the New Yorkers who are afraid of being judged for meditating, the curious, the open-minded, and the seekers who are actively engaged and looking for that path to deeper self-awareness.
It also encapsulates all three states of my evolution. So.
Oh, that's cool. Beautiful, man. That's beautiful. I feel like a lot of those subtleties kind of get lost in the thing like a title. and like even the logo of my podcast, for example, is within it on the color scheme, it says bro no. So within Bro Nouveau, the color scheme kind of jumps out there. And that's intentional too, because there are a lot of things that we need to say, no, dude, like don't do that, Awesome, Kushal. Well, let's pivot over to the three things game. So whoever's birthday is next on the calendar goes first, and we each get a question. What month is your birthday in?
I'm in November. I think I'm closer than probably you.
All right, cool. Happy almost birthday.
Thank you. What are the three things you have learned about money? A, it's necessary. B, more is not always better. And C, it cannot drive your life. It should not drive your life.
Right. It can, but I think there's a lot of documentation around how that doesn't lead to a satisfying life. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay. What are three things I've learned about change? Well, to be snarky, I now am back to coin up laundry in my new apartment, so I need to hold on to my change. I think that living in the Bay Area, I miss seasonal change, as it is a very cool kind of marker of time. And just like you said, every day is small changes, but when there are kind of physical reminders of that change, it's very nice. So maybe I can incorporate some kind of ways to remind myself of that or represent that change, even though the weather here is always the same. And yeah, I don't know. I think I'm on this path where I'm kind of trying to activate conscious change in my life and how to, change for the better, if you will. But I don't know if that's really controllable. I think that change is one of those things that is inevitable and unavoidable, but we don't really have a hand in. So that's my thought on that.
Cool.
For sure. Okay. Well, Kushal, thank you so much for joining the Bro Nouveau podcast and sharing your experiences and your insights. And yeah, I found it very energizing, and I think that the audience will too. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Thomas. Appreciate that.
For sure. Alrighty. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.